the future and for redesigning our civil service system. So mission, public values, and employee needs are all important and central to thinking about public service and creating a sustainable and effective civil service organization of the future. Next slide. Now, the evidence for the arguments I make in the book are drawn from several lines of research that are distinctive not only to public administration but other disciplines. What I started doing research on 30 years ago was something what we called public service motivation. That's come to be called public service motivation in the public administration community. And since we first introduced the idea in 1990, we've had as many as 1,000 studies of public service motivation in more than 50 countries around the world. So these are not ideas that are unique only to public administration in the US where they started, but these are ideas, for instance, that have been studied at least in 50 studies in China, probably an equal number of studies in Korea, and a variety of other countries around the world, including Western and Eastern Europe. So the line of research on public service motivation is important. There's a second line of research that comes out of social psychology that's associated with public or pro-social motivation and behavior. And that also sort of looks at some of the same set of issues related to motivating people in the public service context. Another line of research that emanates from sociology and economics is research on altruism. This is other regarding behavior, and we're developing a more substantial knowledge base on all these facets. The final facet is something that comes out of the field of organizational behavior and organizational psychology that's referred to positive organizational psychology. So the ideas I synthesize in the book are based on high quality research on public service motivation, pro-social motivation, altruism, and positive organizational psychology. And so they have sort of a broad foundation across a variety of disciplines. And I believe that they are really defensive, not only defensible, but distinctive to the needs of public service organizations and the design of public human resource management systems in those organizations. Next slide, please. Now, one of the arguments I make in the book is that the emerging evidence, and the evidence is grounded in those four areas I just referred to, has two things, is characterized by two things. One is it's comprehensive. That is, if we look at the research, what we find is the research is focused on job choice decisions, incentives, job design, performance, ethical behavior, innovative behavior, collaboration, and a variety of other subject matters, all relevant to design of effective design of public civil service systems and public HR systems. That's one of the emerging characteristics from the research. The other is that the research is what I call in the book coherent. It speaks to the institutional ethos of public service. It has a sort of a consistent and coherent foundation in theory and a variety of theories, including theories from sociology, social psychology, economics, public administration, and organizational behavior. And then finally, it also has a coherence in terms of its synergy. That is, that there are a variety of mutually reinforcing ideas coming out of this research that I think are the foundation for our future human resource management systems. So the emerging inferences that can be drawn from the research, I think, are both comprehensive and coherent. And that's an important distinguishing characteristic, one that we couldn't point to from our research in prior years. Next slide, please. So how does the book argue to make public service central? And basically, the argument in the book is that across a whole range of human resource functions and a whole range of human resource disciplines, we can put a public service perspective on each one of those functions. For instance, we need to think more carefully about recruiting for individuals, recruiting and selecting individuals with high public service motivation. This is sort of the topic of the project that I'm currently involved in with colleagues from Korea and Taiwan. We need to think about the meaningfulness of public work, and we can leverage the meaningfulness of public work to motivate people across our organizations. We also need to be thinking about sort of creating environments in which that are receptive to public service. We also need to be thinking about our incentive systems and the compensation system, and that is, I think, is sort of a critical deficiency of the way we thought about public service historically, but there's a wealth of research coming out in those areas. And then finally, we also need to think about leadership and what forms of leadership are best suited and best aligned with high qualities of public service. Next slide, please. Now, in the book, in the concluding chapter of the book, I sort of go through a whole list of proposals that I present in the book. And I categorize those in 3 categories, and the next 3 slides focus on those distinct categories. And I don't have enough time to sort of deal with each one of these. But what I categorize them is, I say, some of these proposals are novel. Some of the proposals focus on traditional ideas, and some of the proposals are borrowed from other fields and have not been tried extensively in the public sector. But for instance, I think we need to be thinking about explicitly selecting for public service motivation. One of the points I make in the book is that we've historically focused on selecting people for the job. We need to be thinking about not only selecting people for the job, we need to be thinking about selecting people for the organization. And selecting people for the organization will reinforce our interests and our concerns about public service. It's also likely to support our interest in developing cultures that are robust with respect to our public service interests and to the missions that our organizations pursue. Next slide, please. Now, on this slide, I sort of focus on traditional proposals, but for instance, some of the ideas like onboarding and mentoring have been around a long time, as has the idea of merit-based personnel systems. They all play a large role in putting public service at the center of our organizations and sustaining passion for public service. But we need to do them more effectively. We need to do them better, but they are clearly central to the nature of human resource systems going forward. Next slide, please. Some of the proposals, imported proposals, that again, I don't have any time to sort of devote to these, but for instance, one of the ideas that is sort of a rejuvenation of the ideas of job design related to a concept called relational job design is important for connecting people who do work with the people for whom that work makes a difference, particularly in a pro-social way. So relational job design is an important concept undergirding our design of work. Another idea that comes out of the positive psychology movement is job crafting, where individual employees redesign their work to make their work more meaningful. Another idea that I came across that I think is very important for public organizations is career counseling, where we may have people come to the work because they sort of feel that it sort of suits their interests and their identity, but we need to help them sort of make that connection. And so career counseling can be important. Next slide, please. So my conclusions in the book and my conclusions from this research over the last 30 years is that we now have an emerging intellectual capital that's created a foundation for what I refer to as a public service motivational model. And that's important for the way we sort of structure our civil service systems and our management policies and our human resource programs in the future. So I consider it to be an important foundation for the future of HR and civil service design. We have the comprehensiveness of the research indicates that it has implications for all HR functions: recruitment, selection, leadership, and compensation, among other things. And then finally, and that's my time, if I can stop it. that it has positive consequences for individuals, programs, organizations, and citizens. And that, I think, is the bottom line for us. That is, we need to sort of serve not only the interests of the individuals in our organizations, but programs, organizations, and citizens. And with that, I will stop, and I think we're ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Perry, for your comprehensive presentation on how to manage and motivate organizations and create an environment to sustain passion for public service. To have a more in-depth view on the two speeches, we will now continue with a discussion session with the two keynote speakers. This discussion will be moderated by Professor Choi Heung-seok of Korea University. Professor Choi, please allow me to hand the microphone over to you.
Okay. Hi, Jim. Hi, Andrew. Are you seeing me?
Yes, we see you.
I'm very glad to meet you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, very glad. And then I actually have prepared two questions. One has to do with COVID-19. The other one has to do with the PSM, Public Service Motivations. And in the interest of time, I think I'll just posit the two questions so that I think each of you can take both. And then when you feel that the time is right, we can just switch to one to the other one. And also, I'll let we have President Park and President Kwon, two presidents here, so that I'll also ask them, if appropriate, if we have time to jump in, to provide some comments and questions. So my question first, that has to do with COVID-19, is going like this. And I actually feel that the COVID-19 has opened up a new kind of playground where we see some professional accountability is interacting in a rather awkward manner with political accountability. I see it in the United States, and then South Korea is no exception. And then I'm wondering how such interaction between different types of accountability are being played out in Australia. And then I also wonder, what would you think the implications, its implications for HRM at the senior executive service level? And then another question of mine that has to do with PSM is that maybe low-powered incentives, and then to a less extent, total compensation seems more familiar in Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, as Jim also already mentioned. In the past 20 plus years, though, it seems that South Korean public sector organizations, government organizations, and public corporations, they have been moving in a sense, in a reverse direction, from low-powered incentives to high-powered incentives. And then to some extent, from a total compensation to a rather base salary incentives. And then we already have, for example, pay-per-performance system in place. As for public corporations, we have yearly evaluation and also incentive pays. Very strict schedule based on the evaluation is paid as incentives for the people in public corporations. Then, what would you say to them? So is it too much? Maybe I think each of you can take both, but maybe we can start with the one with that has to do with the PSM. Then, when the time's right, we can jump into another issue. Maybe I'll
want
ask Jim to respond first.
Well, yeah, I was remarking to Andrew before we started that the U.S. Civil service system has been on the General Accountability Office's high risk list for 19 years. Pay is at sort of the core of that. So one of the issues we have is that at any given point in time, the snapshot may not be particularly promising. And I think to some extent what you're describing in Korea is perhaps a snapshot of some trends. That is low-powered to high-powered incentives and total compensation to a greater focus on base salary. I don't necessarily see those as long-term trends, but I think one of the things we need to get straight, and one of the reasons I propose, although I have to admit that total compensation is not something for which we have lots of evidence, although it may be more indicative of Asian countries than it is of the U.S., although I know it's not indicative of Asian countries like Singapore or Hong Kong or other places to which I travel in Asia, is that we need to sort of focus on public service. And one reason I argue for total compensation, particularly in the U.S. context, although elsewhere, is that I believe it helps put into perspective what's important or should be important. And this is to some extent a normative argument. What should be important to our civil servants or our public servants. And the beginning and end should not be how much money you can make or how high you can get your base salary. It ought to be ultimately about public service. And I think there's a propensity to lose the focus on public service when our compensation structures deviate significantly to trying to emulate, for instance, what's going on in the private sector or elsewhere, because then it sort of changes the nature of our institutions. But I think, in the U.S. we've not had sort of a straight line development related to compensation for public employees at all levels of government. So the way we sort of think about compensation today and our criticisms of it are different than what we might have said 10 years ago or even 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. I do know, though, from looking at the cross-national comparisons of base salaries and other compensation like pensions and the like, that there are relatively few countries that go sort of the straight line and are sort of on the line with respect to total compensation. They either are below levels for base compensation or above levels for base compensation, or the pensions are too high or the pensions are too low. So it's sort of hard to find a happy medium, but I think we need to redirect our attention to the sort of the total compensation perspective to be able to sort of center our public service on public service and not on the fiscal or financial rewards. Let me stop there and let Andrew sort of comment.
Thanks.
A couple
Andrew,
of comments.
would you like to have some comments on this issue of compensation and incentives? Andrew?
Sorry?
Yeah.
A few points. I think Jim's material is terribly important in its challenge of some of the theories that have been thrown around for the last 30 years about public choice, for example, and that motivations in the public service are all about self-interest and the money. I think that they have got it wrong, and Jim's put his finger on it, that it isn't just about the money. But there are a range of agendas here, and I do think it is important to have total compensation as your picture, simply because that's the resources being used, and thinking about total compensation is the right thing to do. In Australia, we played with more high-powered incentives through performance pay and performance bonuses. They began to be introduced in the early 90s. They were pushed very hard. That was by a Labor government, and then a Conservative government wanted to take it a lot further in the late 1990s, so that vice ministers, for example, like myself, were on performance pay bonus systems and contracts. But we have moved a long way from that in the last decade. There are very few performance pay arrangements now in the Australian public service, because it was found that they did not deliver the efficiencies expected, but indeed they caused unhappiness within the service. People felt that they were getting in the way of teamwork, even if that wasn't entirely true. To get them to be fair took a hell of a lot of resources. As a manager, to make sure that all my staff felt the performance pay distribution was a fair distribution took a lot of effort. And that extra effort was just not worthwhile. So we've moved away from all of that. If you want to get better performance, there are other things that are more important than the pay. Most important is that people do get their feedback. They get feedback on performance that's timely, relevant, fair, comprehensive. That what's expected of them fits with what the mission of the organisation is, that there's alignment between what's expected of an individual and what's expected of the organisation. And you can't have a performance of individuals being monitored if the supervisor isn't making the job easy. So the supervisor's got to make sure if there's somebody who's a consistent bad performer, get rid of them because that gets in the way of the other people. The supervisor's got to make sure that the IT works. So there are a whole range of things you can do to improve performance, but you don't need to have this big picture bonus system that we used to try and it did not work.
Okay, I would like to ask, yeah, would you? I think President Park has some question or comments. Yeah, please go ahead.
네, 저는 그냥 질문이 좀 있는데.
I do have a question.
아까 그 호저 교수님께서
So the Professor
최근
Pojo,
들어서 특히 새로운
You
신기술에
mentioned
대한
that
부분,
recently
이런 부분에 대해서
the
많이
importance of new
강조하셨는데요.
technology
저는
has
사실
been emphasized.
공무원을 이제 공무원에 대한 교육을 담당하고 있기 때문에
I'm responsible for the education of public officials, so I'm quite interested in education.
신기술에 대한 그 중요성이 이제 우리
So,
공무원에서 많이
And
감소되고
I clearly feel the importance of new technologies.
교육에 대해서는
So as for the education of new technologies on public officials, is there any methodology or approach you take? You also briefly mentioned outside experts, but at the same time, well, the IT education and training on the internal, civil servants and officials, what is being done in Australia? You also put an emphasis on collaboration between the central government and the local government, and even between national ministries, the importance of collaboration is getting even higher. So in educating the civil servant, how do you put an emphasis on that? I have one last question.
특히 이제 뭐 저희 쪽에서는 이걸 어떻게 봐야 될까? PSM이라고 말씀을 주셨고,
You mentioned PSM, and you also mentioned ethics.
지금 우리의 경우에도 지금 계속 이제 밀레니얼
so in our case, we have a lot of new millennials joining our organizations. And so in Korea, we also talk a lot about the values of public services. They cannot be compensated financially only. The Professor Perry emphasized the importance of total compensation.
그런 부분에 대해서는 미국에서는 혹시 그
So in the United States,
그 부분에
for this part, how do you deal with in public education?
Am I supposed to make it? Yeah. Okay, actually, President Park has a lot of questions. Three different ones. The first one has to do with the training and education of new technologies. And for example, these days, in the public sector context, they are starting to use and adopt new technologies. Maybe cloud data-related technologies. And then she was curious how the training and education of new technologies are being done in the context of Australia and the United States. And the other one has to do with collaboration. Collaboration in the context of South Korean government has been an issue. So people emphasize on it, but I feel that it is something that we can really never achieve to a satisfactory level. And then if maybe something that we can learn from the practice that is being done in the United States or Australia, she will be very glad to hear. The other one, the third one has to do with public service motivation. In the context of South Korea, they call it public values. It's a 공직가치. It's a public position, values-related public positions. So, and then some of the trainings and educations are focused on increasing enhancement of those public service motivations. And then also she was curious how that the enhancement effort for public service motivation is being somehow done in the context of Australian and then the US training and educations for public servants. Could you respond to maybe one of these three questions?
I will try my best if I may, but I want to leave room for Jim to come in as well. On the issue of training in IT, I think what we've found that over the 90s and 2000s, we contracted out a large part of our IT systems, and we've become enormously reliant on external experts. That will always be the case, our reliance on whether it be Microsoft or any of the other big companies. But what we've decided to do is to set up what we've called the professions model. And one of the professions that's going to be a key profession across the public service is in digital technology. And so we've identified a leader of that profession, and they will be both training people within the public service to be experts, but they'll also be training everybody else to be mindful of IT possibilities for themselves. So that they don't have to be an expert, but they have to be a utilizer and have to know what's available and what could be used. So they've only just started this in Australia, the professions model. And as I say, the digital side of it is one of the first cabs off the rank to try and see if we can have a big investment in the training of public servants in that profession. On the second issue on collaboration, there's been quite a lot of emphasis on joint work using project management, so a more agile way to handle issues. You could have a team from different agencies to handle an issue, and you need to train people about good project management in managing that issue as one of the important parts. But underlying collaboration is, of course, having mobility, so there's more people moving across. I think it's fair to say that in Australia we have more mobility across agencies than you would see in the United States, that we have a public service model that more senior people, it's very rare that senior people have only been in one agency, whereas that's not the case in most of the US systems. But we're talking about trying to take that further. I'm a bit nervous that you could take it too far and lose sight of the importance of technical expertise in the different missions of different agencies. But we also have invested in that I'm part of, the Australian New Zealand School of Government. And it is a collaboration across universities in Australia and New Zealand. It's owned by the government jurisdictions, and it provides for senior people training through an executive master's program and other programs, but it trains people from the different jurisdictions working together. So it does actually help build networks in the long term because people have trained and worked together through the Australian New Zealand School of Government. Let me stop there. Let Jim answer a bit more of the third question, but I might come back on the third question in a moment.
Well, the other point related to technology is that Professor Podger and I just collaborated on a special issue that's forthcoming in December in the Asia Pacific Journal of Public Administration, for which Professor Che is on the board. And that whole issue is going to be available online free for anyone that wants to look at it. So you can learn more about the professions model and some of the other issues related to technology management in both China and Australia. So I would encourage you to sort of pick up an issue or that issue and look at those online articles. There are 6 articles related to technology. Let me say about public service motivation that I don't see bringing people on board to be primarily the function of training. As I indicated in the book, for instance, I talk about recruiting and selecting people for the organization, not just the job. So if we want people who have a particular values stance and an ethical stance, we want to recruit the right people, and that has to sort of reflect the culture of the organization and maybe the culture of government and culture of public service. So that's one way to sort of get people on sort of the right page. Another thing I talk about in the book, in chapter 7, I devote all of chapter 7 to the whole issue of socialization, assuming that people may not come to public service with the right values or the values that are expected of their unit. But that change doesn't necessarily occur as a function of the training process. It may occur as a function of the mentoring process. It may occur as a function of onboarding, which is a year-long process in some organizations. And so we need to sort of think very broadly about how do we sort of draw people with sort of the right sort of ethical and service orientations together in our public organizations. Another thing that's important, I think, is the mission. And we have great examples of people who have been drawn for the right reasons to pursue particular public missions, but we want to get the right people attached to those missions. And that's not necessarily a function of training so much as it is, again, socialization and recruitment and selection. And so I think we need to think very broadly about public service motivation and people having the right values and the right ethics, and how do we draw those people in, and how we sort of create what I call passion for public service in the book.
Can I add something on that issue as well? We put a lot of work some years ago into not only getting people to understand the public service values, which are actually written into our Public Service Act, but we got out material on what we called how do you embed the values. And we talked about 3 strategies for trying to embed the public service values. The first strategy is what we call leadership. That is not only senior people walking the talk, but it included ethics awareness training, a whole range of things of that sort. The second area was management. That is, all your management processes have to be entirely consistent with your values. So that would include your HR systems, your performance management systems. All those things have to reflect the values and be seen to reflect the values. And the third area is assurance. How can you be sure that you've got it there? You can do that by, for example, at the tough end, making sure that people who breach the code of conduct are actually taken to task. But you can also have surveys of your staff. You can have surveys of your clients and get feedback to say, are you confident of the values being understood and being abided by within your organization?
Thank you very much. The discussion is getting more interesting, more and more interesting, but I'm very afraid that in the interest of time, we have to wrap up our sessions. To continue this interesting discussion, I think NHI should create another opportunity when the COVID-19 is over. I really thank you very much, Andrew and then Jim. Then we'll have to stop here. Then we'll be seeing you maybe hopefully sometime next year.
When the vaccine arrives.
Yes.
We hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the insightful discussion. We're sorry to stop here. This brings us to the end of the plenary session. Since we're running out of time, we would only continue within just a couple of minutes, and we will start at 10:20. Thank you very much.
Andrew, good to see you. Time to depart.
네, 자리가 정돈되는 대로 세션 1을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin the session shortly as soon as we are ready up on the stage. Welcome back. Well, let us begin the first session of today's conference with the theme of diversity management in the public HR for the new era. The moderator for this session is Professor Moon Myung-jae, the Dean of the College of Social Science at Yonsei University. Please greet Professor Moon with a big round of applause.
네, 반갑습니다. 오늘 이렇게
So good morning.
행사에 첫
Thank
번째
you very
세션
much for inviting
사회를
me
맡게 된 연세대학교
as a
행정학과의
moderator for this
문명재입니다.
very important
오늘
session.
기조
I am
발표에
Moon Myung-jae. I am the Dean of the College of Social Science of Yonsei University. I really enjoyed the two keynote presentations that preceded before, especially during this COVID-19 time. What kind of focus the Korean government should have to promote the HRM and also the HRD. And in this sense, I think we somehow need a choice and focus, or we have to think about whether we have to explore some new areas. As for the first session, this will be about the diversity management for the new era in public HR. And for this, we have two presentations in store for us. I actually looked at the overall schedule of the program, and each session is given 50 minutes. So for the two presenters, I would like to give 15 minutes to each of them, and then after that, we will have the Q&A and discussion session. I heard that the presentation will be delivered in English, and the overall Q&A and discussion session will be proceeded in Korean. That's what I was instructed. So let me briefly introduce the two speakers before moving on to the first presentation by Professor Lee Chan. So the first speaker of the session 1 is Professor Lee Chan, and he's going to talk about the HRD for diversity and inclusion beyond generation. And then the second presenter is the Professor Park Jung-ho, and he's going to talk about the diversity management for the technology resources and science. So he will give us some examples. Now, we would like to invite the Professor Lee Chan of Seoul National University for his presentation. Please greet him with a big round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Professor Chan Lee at Seoul National University. I'm also the Director of Career Development Center at Seoul National University. Today, my topic is Beyond Generation, Human Resource Development for Diversity and Inclusion. So we will cover the contents, starting with the balanced personal management in public sector. Probably you heard about balanced scorecard, but have you heard about the balanced personal management? There's a reason that in public sector, in Korea, we try to set the balanced personal management. Before I jump into generational diversity and inclusion, I will go through overview of balanced personal management, and then we will go in depth in terms of general diversity and inclusion. The overview of balanced personnel in public sector in Korea in terms of gender equality or in terms of individuals with disability, so on and so forth. For example, the college that I'm working, we have 129 professors in the building that I'm working in. Could you guess how many female professors working in the same building? Only 8 female professors out of 129. I mean, it's just a case, so we cannot generalize based on one single case, but that's a kind of a symbol. So as you see here, in terms of central government and especially director level and local government, it's getting better. It's getting better in terms of the ratio of female public officers in public sector. But yet, as you see here, the maximum is about 20%. If it's getting a higher position, it gets more serious. So we need to keep in mind when we talk about the diversity, the gender issue is something that we need to working on. And individuals with disability, as you see here, both central government, local government, the index is getting better, but as you see here, there are far more ways that we need to go. In other case, employment of local talent, what we meant by this, everyone want to work in the area of Seoul metropolitan city. So in terms of trying to keep the local talent in a certain local area, we set the rule that especially for the public sectors, we try to recruit to local talent. So that's the phenomenon, the result that we are working on this. And proportion of science and engineering majors. You may wonder, why would they care about it? As you see here, in Korea, in the past, the majors of science and engineering folks has relatively low proportion in public sector, especially for the higher positions. So that's something that we need to looking into. So there are many other index that we are working on toward balanced personal management in public sector. Knowing that there are several different aspects when we say diversity and inclusion. Today, I especially focus on the generational diversity. Why? Because as you see here, overall in the organization, there are 5 different generations working together in the same organization. But even if there is a certain level of generation gap by a biological age, it's different based on which level of generation they are in. For example, the age 40 and age 50, there's a 10 years age gap, generation gap. But to the folks, young generation like age 20s, 30s, they are same middle-aged managers, what we call in Korean ajoshi. But the age generation gap between age 25 and age 30, even if it's just 5 years of age gap, among the younger generation, the day they feel the generation gap is much bigger. One of my specialty is coaching. So I often do conduct executive coaching. I provide executive coaching to the private sector executives. For example, when I provide executive coaching for Samsung Electronics executive, what I found, none of them had bad relations with their son. Could you guess why? None of the executive people had bad relations with their son. Because there's no relations. They had no time to spend anything with their children. But to their age, like 50, 60, it's typical. They spend so much time at workplace, so they have no time to communicate with their younger generation, even in family. So can you think how they would communicate with their subordinate at the workplace? This is what generation diversity was in most Korean workplace. So we used to focus on work-life balance in terms of that. Now, after post-corona, we are talking about work-learning balance. We will talk about it somewhat later. To the baby boomers, they think, if you watch smartphone too much, how could you communicate with others? No, no. If you talk to millennials or Generation Z, they think, since I'm using smartphone, that's the main reason that I communicate with more people globally. So it's different perspective. There's a huge generation gap. Let's see. Now, overall, every single country suffered from COVID-19. But if you see here, look at the graph. Only Generation Z, they have found their own way to survive with their own new hobby. Things get different, yet the way they feel at workplace, oh, I spent too much time online. I want to reconnect with my folks face to face. So it's just a matter of different communication way. The way they feel it, it's the same with their older generation. Look at here. In Korea now, we have severe competition to get a job after they graduate university, because we have so many higher education graduates these days. Yet, among the new employee, the people who quit their job within a year, it's 28%. Why? When we have exit interview, among the people who quit their job within a year, 48% of people said that because of the generation gap, I couldn't communicate with my supervisor. That's the reason that I quit the job. It's getting serious. So diversity among different generations, it's not the matter of the individual issue. It's getting organizational issue, something that all of us at the society level needed to pay attention. So if you see the generation differences at a workplace, 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, each generation, even if they work in the same workplace, the way they feel, so the perception of generation gap is totally different. Look at here. Which area people most suffer from? Communication method. Communication method. Based on the research between the organizational satisfaction level at the communication level, which one would have more influence on the organization performance? The research found that communication level is much more important than organizational satisfaction level for organization performance. So this is a critical issue. Based on the generation, based on their position, every single generation has different perspective. Is it a matter of right or wrong? No, it's a matter of difference. So each generation needs to find a way how they need to communicate with the different generation people. So millennials and Generation Z wants opportunity to speak up and get noticed and perform. When leaders ask Generation Z, what do you want? How can I do if you want to work more at workplace? They said that I need empowerment. So they provide empowerment, still doesn't work. Why not? They said that if you give me empowerment, okay, I will do self-directed work, but with one condition. If I feel interested in that field. What about the other areas that if you are not interested, even if the leader provides empowerment, it turns out that they wouldn't work. So at the workplace, because of this generation gap, the conflict issue is getting bigger and bigger. So what are we supposed to do in public sector? Leadership and followership, it needs to be developed both ways. How can we do that? Many organizations start reverse mentoring to address this issue. Not only top-down way, but also from a bottom-up way, so that each generation share their own know-how each other, so that they can grow both. Due to the limited time, this is what I prepared so far for today's presentation, but I will be happy to discuss further in our Q&A session. Thank you so much.
네, 이 교수님 감사합니다.
So thank you, Professor Lee. He
문제,
talked about the
과연
problems in
HR
intergenerational
쪽에서
communications and how HR can resolve these issues.
그 다음으로는 우리
Next,
정호 교수님
we would like to invite the Jong-ho Park
다양성 관리라는
for
제목.
his presentation on diversity management for public human resources in science and technology.
Thank you. My name is Jong-ho Park. I'm working at Sangmyung University. Today, I'm going to make a very brief presentation about diversity management for scientists in government sector. Well, my presentation may not give you absolute conclusion or solutions, but I think it is time to think about we need to somehow reframe the human resource management approaches for scientists and engineers in the public institution and in government sectors. I think we all know South Korea experienced MERS in 2015, and at the time, the public criticized a lot governmental responses and the poor preparedness for pandemic disease, possibly pandemic disease, but Center for Disease Control successfully managed the MERS in 2015. And from that experience, we found that our society, Korean society, may lack awareness of the severity of pandemic disease. And also, as you know, every critical decision should be made by our political leaders. They are elected by the public. They have authority and discretion. But they always have some dilemma between economic situation and public health issues. Sometimes some political leaders downplays the severity of a pandemic disease, and so they emphasize the economic condition is more important than the public health issues. Anyway, from the experiences of MERS in 2015, we realized that the highly trained individuals, like technologically trained or scientifically trained individuals, are necessary for government to manage such a risk. So, as you know, South Korea relatively respond to COVID-19 successfully compared to other countries. It is because of the experiences we failed, and we were criticized a lot because of such poor responses. But that's not the only case for the future. I think the next presenters will talk about the functions of future government, and we need to think about the new functions and new policies and new public employees. But unfortunately, no one cares about human resource management in the public sector because, let me get to some kind of conclusion here. So human resource management in South Korea is emphasizing unitary system, like efficiency. So if we find some functions and missions, we try to recruit and hire quite talented individuals into public sectors, and then we want to manage the framework we use over the 20 years, over the 30 years, because that's the way we can improve the efficiency of management. Anyway, but we are facing new challenges, so I call it like this disruptive feature and nature of challenges, and pandemic diseases and new cyber security issues and IT issues and new materials and new technology may affect the public seriously. Then who can somehow predict the possibility of that problems, and who can provide some policy alternative or quite rapid response to the emerging issues? I think we need some scientists and engineers in government side. But as I said, the human resource management system is pretty much valued the efficiency, integrity, and unitary system for civil servants. So fortunately, I had a chance to research Rural Development Administration, RDA. Over the 6 months, I worked for RDA, and I somehow tried to redesign human resource management system for their agencies. And I tried to analyze their missions and functions, and then I found that they also take a critical role in preventing pandemic disease in rural areas. We have a CDC, Center for Disease Control for Humankind. We have RDA for agriculture industry and livestock industries. They developed the technologies and vaccine and all manuals to respond to pandemic disease in rural life and agriculture industries. And when I had interviews with the public employees there, I start to realize that, I did not have much knowledge about such a various challenges to agriculture industry and livestock industries, and so many, flowers, trees, and animals. All things can be vulnerable to pandemic disease, and RDA silently take care of those diseases and challenges over the 5 decades. So, when they recruited as a scientist and then they built their career in the RDA, and I found something interesting. That is kind of somewhat socialized, generalized scientists, not specifically developing their own skills and knowledges. So I will talk in more in detail later. Let me go to some HR system in South Korea. As I said, the unitary system is very important value. So job classification, job family, category functions. And I think many of you do not know, we have so many different types of job categories and job functions. Technically, we divided our civil servants into 5 job family, like general civil servants and technical civil servants and research civil servants. Under the job family, there are 54 categories like industry, agriculture, public health, and statistic immigration. And under the job categories, we have 164 job functions: electricity, tax, prosecution, and social welfare, agriculture, chemistries. Wow, South Korea is really scientific to divide it such a various functions and duties under one system, under one HR system. Well, yes, we did a lot of work to make such a various civil servants into one system. And then we try to build quite similar types of wage scale. We try to build quite similar types of promotion processes, evaluation processes. But that's the way we can improve the efficiency of management. South Korea has a HR system, as I said. Universality and unitary system is a very important value. And integration of HR system, because equity inside of the organization is very important to public employees. You know, civil servants may compare their colleagues. Well, he promoted like 5 years, but I should promote it like 5, 6, 7 years later. Then, you know, individuals may start to think it's unfair. So then individuals, civil servants may lower their performance and motivation to work. So that's the, I think, underlying values, equity, unitary system for civil servants, regardless of some characteristic of their work, and especially under the risk situation, such as civil servants may be treated as just like a general civil servants over a long time. So what I want to tell you from this slide is unitary and integration of HR system can be characterized as a human resource management in South Korea. Let me quickly go through the RDA. The mission is development of science and technology for Korean culture. And under the name of RDA, there are 4 different research institutes. So National Institute of Agricultural Science, Crop Science, Horticulture Science, Herbal Science, and Animal Science. We actually include all different types of scientists, engineers for agricultural industry and rural life under the name of RDA. Actually, they did a lot of research and development. And interestingly, their classification is simpler than just general civil servants. In South Korea, general civil servants have a 9th class or grade. So rank 9 is the lowest one, rank 1 is the highest one. And inside of the organization, civil servants want to be promoted as early as they can. It's kind of an important factor for their work motivation. And research civil servants, compared to general civil servants, they only have a 2 class, so 6 and 5. The reason why is, we hope the researchers and scientists to focus more on research work, not promotion. Scientists need to be more research-oriented, what they're service-oriented, not their inside organization. There's somehow political or social factors inside organization. That's why South Korea simplified the class system for research civil servants. And in the RDA, as you can see, function classification, there are 12 different types of classification: crop, agriculture, environment, crop protection, sericultural, entomology, horticulture, biotechnology, genetics, and so forth. You can name it. You can name it related to animals and flowers, trees, and crops, and so forth. And so characteristic of RDA can be kind of a research institute, and they also take a quite important role in responding to some epidemic disease to animals and trees and flowers and crops and so forth. And the simplification of rank, as I said, is to push our scientists to focus on more their research performance, and specifically divided to manage such scientists in terms of their promotion, in terms of evaluation, in terms of job rotation. So specifically divided to manage those scientists in terms of HR management. And so, the function and mission for RDA is not only conduct research, but also prevent a pandemic disease in rural and agricultural area. Here is what I found from interviews and surveys and analyzing some procedures and rules. And first thing is those scientists, we hope they focus on science and research, but their critical motivation factor is promotion. And secondly, job rotation seems to weaken their professional development. I mean, the job rotation jeopardize their career building process, but not quite frequently happen. But compared to general civil servants, those scientists also experience the job rotation. And once they rotate, once they move to another position, they start to new topics and new areas of research, then they feel like they become master students, because those knowledges were pretty much, even if it's seemingly related, but those knowledges, I mean, those topics and their research work is pretty much different from what they have done over the 20 years. And also, the situation or phenomena I found is excellent employees tend to go to headquarters. Headquarters is mainly focused on administrative function, on coordinating research and so forth. Why we, send our excellent employees, I mean, scientists to headquarters? That's the question I had. I will explain later. And the rigidity of function classification. As I explained, there are 12 different types of job classification. So scientists belong to each classification. And once we have the issues or research topic or problems, we need to somehow integrate those different types of scientists into one project. But such a job classification may hinder those scientists to become the part of the project. Why? Once they become the part of the research project, they may lose the opportunity to promote. So conflict between research project and functional classification exists. So the result of the efficient classification, efficient methods for scientists, just like general civil servants, I found that limitation of interdisciplinary collaboration for research trend and research topic. For example, genetic disease or other new material which may affect the growth of some food or crops, then we may need some scientists who know some part of those knowledges, like a different part of different types of classification. However, once you belong one classification as a civil servant, you think about the promotion opportunity, you think about the evaluation result, you think about the job rotation for the future. So then, many of them start to be somehow, avoid those opportunities. They become civil servants, like a bureaucrat, not scientists. So it happens that, RDA needs to develop the new technology and provide those knowledge to the public, and they are facing difficulties with technology convergence and interagency cooperation. And I'd like to say, they started their career, scientists, engineers, they started their career as scientists and engineers. But the more they spend time inside the organization, I think the more they become like a bureaucrats, like a generalized and bureaucratized specialist. So if not, I think it's time to reconsider those high level of expertise. I mean, the individuals with high level of expertise treated just like a general civil servant. Do you think we can have such a high level of experts inside government? I think maybe yes, or maybe not. I conducted a survey on all the civil servants. So I questioned, growth of expertise is important? They say yes. What is the greatest compensation motivation for you? Promotion. Something strange. And technological convergence is important for organization competitiveness? Yes. But still, they want to keep their functional classification. So functional classification needs to be revised? No. So these questions show somewhat contradicting viewpoint. Even if they want to improve their technological knowledge, I mean, their expertise with science, still they want to have those some general issues like promotion and job rotation and so forth. And their classification obviously hinder the progress of interdisciplinary research, but still they want to keep the classification. Why? As I said, job rotation, promotion, and so forth. Those systems based on our unitary human resource management. And here, 71% of civil servants here say their critical motivation comes from promotion. So concluding remark, we are facing new society and government need to somehow realign functions for new challenges, which is complex, which is unpredictable. And as a conclusion, we may say we improve governmental response and we need to prepare tools for such risk and disaster. And as a tool, we also think about the human resource. But the framework of current system, like integrated one system, we may fail to recruit and somehow improve those human capital to become very important kind of important tools to respond to risk and disaster. So finally, I think about the task knowledgeability and task variability. This is a classic, but we are facing risk society, and we need to somehow analyze what are the risk factors that relate to public employees, and in really important crisis, some employees, I mean public servants, need to take care of those cases, and then we need to design or build a new framework for those kind of employees, different from the traditional system. Thank you. I think my presentation is longer than my expectation. Sorry.
네, 감사합니다. 박 교수님께서
Thank you very much, Professor Park.
기술인재와 관련해서
His
농업진흥청
presentation
가지고
elaborated on the
오늘
case of
저희들
RDA with regard
세 세션이
to
준비되어
scientific
있는데 각
and
세션별로 50분
technology
그러니까
talent.
시간 없이
So we have 3 individual sessions. Each session
해야 할 가장
is
중요한
50 minutes
역할은
long. So
주어진 시간에 잘
my
맞춰서 그
biggest
다음
role is
섹션에
to be a timekeeper so that we can smoothly run the next
혼자가 따로
session.
없기 때문에
Since there is
서로
no
겸,
panelist
그다음에 질문, 그다음에 플로어에서
outside
질문해
the
주시면
speakers, now is the time for
오늘
us
두
to address any
주제가
questions
정말
from the
다양성
floor.
관리라는 중요한 주제를 다루는데
I think two
세대 간의
presentations
문제와 과학
focused
기술 인재
on
관련된 문제를 다루는 거예요.
diversity. The first session was
얼마
on the
전에
diversity
제가 아는
management
사람이
in
저한테
public
이야기를
HR for the new year, and the second
자기가
is about the diversity. I'm sorry, the
한
presentation
가지를
is
즐겨 있는
about
사람이
diversity.
있었습니다. 그 말은
Recently, I
뭐냐면
was told that
굉장히
his
사고가
acquaintance
유연하고
loves
산다는 거예요.
jeans,
50대였음에도 불구하고.
although that
그런데
person is in
꼰대
his
지수
50s.
이렇게 하는
But you know what? There is a
간단한
so-called
설문지가 있습니다. 그래서 몇 점 나올까? 자기는
the 꼰대 index,
꼰대 이제
which
100점이면은
means
꼰대
the people in their
확실한
50s
거죠.
or 60s
자기는
and
한
40s,
50점
even
나올 거라고
40s who always
생각했는데
believe they
120점
are right.
나왔다고
And that person
그러니까
actually
본인이
did
꼰대이냐
that
아니냐
test,
생각하는 거와
and
달리
he got
자기도
120
모르게
points,
그렇게
which
되어
means
있다.
that he is
그런데
absolutely
아까
꼰대.
말씀하신 것처럼
So
여러
he
세대가
does not
MZ 세대는
realize that he is a
밀레니엄과
꼰대, but
Z
he is
세대가
actually the
합쳐진
case.
MZ 세대라고
So we are talking about the generational diversity between the older generation and the younger generation, represented millennial generation as well as the Generation Z.
패션이 없는 상황에서 일을 잘 진행해야 되니까 엄청나게
So there
어려운
is such a
상황 속에서
generational
새로운
gap. In
방법이
addition to
있어야
that, you don't have teen dinos anymore.
수가 있을 것 같고요. 그래서
So you
리버스
need to take various
멘토링처럼,
approaches to deal with such a
예전에는
situation. As Professor Lee, well, reverse mentoring
다양한 방식의 멘토링이
can be
필요하고
considered
그건
as one of the
협업적인
options.
구조와도
I think that is closely linked to a
우리 박진
cognitive
교수님께서
structure.
나중에 말씀하시겠지만 미래 영향에서의
And as to be covered by Gene Park, a professor, I think building future capacity is of greatest importance. As for science and technology and the capability with regard to that, on one side, we need to raise a generalist, but all at the same time, we need to raise specialists within the organization. As mentioned in the keynote session, the harmony and the right mix between the generalist and the specialist skill is quite important. And how to nurture scientific and technological capability going forward. This is another area of focus of RDA going forward. Of course, the RDA has a great number of researchers and scientists. Nonetheless, in the future, we need a specialist in one specific area, but with the general knowledges of other areas. And I think that is the direction for the education and training for the public officials going forward. So what kind of programs need to be developed and what kind of courses need to be developed and adapted in order to raise such a capacity and capability? And another focus area is to nurture interactive communication between and among generations. Our two presenters, I have one question. To Professor Lee, first. As in the case of the film Intern, it was so beautiful. It was depicted so beautiful, but if you have that reality, then it will be quite challenging because that was requiring harmony between the one who works as an intern, as an old man, but who works as a boss, as a young woman. If we deal with such a situation through educational programs, then what kind of approach do we need to take to facilitate that?
And to Professor Park, you mentioned during your presentation that you used the term generalized experts. And I think it's somehow related with the career building and job rotation. So yes, we need a variety of expertise. At the same time, the communications between experts and the general civil servants, that's also very critical. So how can we reflect these in the training programs? I know that we have limited time. So among the audiences, if you do have questions, then please address your question so that maybe the presenters can selectively answer the question in order to save the time. And for those who are joining us online, if you have any questions, please type in your questions in the chatting box. Then, if you don't have any questions, then we will first hear from Mr. Lee.
The research team at Seoul National University recently conducted a research which will be released this week on generational gap and diversity for each position. Well, general manager, assistant manager, the entry level, the staff member, associate manager, well, their job satisfaction, and the fairness in recruitment and the fairness in the evaluation. The highest level of satisfaction was found in which position, do you think? The highest level would be executive. The highest satisfaction was found among general managers or bujang. Executive members, actually, they feel very insecure even in autumn. But because they are executive members, they are subject to more severe evaluation process. But general managers, even within the organization, they feel quite secure. Then the lowest satisfaction, where do you think is found? Not entry-level employees. Well, they have so much fun working for a certain organization, any organization, because they have just been hired. But the associate managers, now they get used to the organization and they work the most. But their dissatisfaction level was so high, whether it's in public sector or private sector. So general manager, associate manager, there must be so much frustration if they communicate with each other because they have such different level of satisfaction. As the chair mentioned, how should we deal with this through education and training? Recently, the Society of Creativity in Korea conducted an assessment of creativity level. They actually evaluated the creativity level. Well, the entry level, the associate manager, and the manager, and deputy manager, and the manager level, general manager level. You know what? Actually, the creativity goes down, declines. The thing is that, well, the only exception is that the general manager has a slightly higher creativity level compared to deputy manager because they need to be made an executive member of the organization. They do everything to be more creative. But you know what? The creativity-related courses focused mostly on new members of the organization, the entry level, but the diagnosis of the creativity of the members of the organization, the thing is that the associate manager and the entry-level employees have such a high level of creativity. So the thing is, well, the creativity needs to be exerted by those people, but they are subject to the creativity class, while those in the middle manager level do not have creativity. They are not subject to any kind of a training for that. There is such a gap. So whether it's an interaction and communication classes or creativity classes, the training and education need to be targeted, not based on the perception, but on actual level and actual status. So agility in learning, the curation of learning, the interaction, these are the things in high demand. So these need to be focused. Thank you. In the private sector, those researches were conducted, the users shared with that. But I think the survey in the public sector produced quite a similar result. I'd like to turn to Professor Park.
I didn't have time to talk about the risk factors during my presentation. So I'm not here to criticize the RDA. I just got the impression that they're scientists, but at the same time, they're very general public servants. It's because they went through the socialization processes, and it's very difficult to distinguish themselves from their peers. And also, a lot of comparison is being made. And as a result, the inherent values of the individuals get changed together with their identity or the job experiences. And it was very frustrating to find that. I'm not claiming that the researchers and the scientists have to be managed in a separate way, but we do have some professional job classification. But
when we say expertise, many of them are at the level of very general, ordinary things. But in order to aggressively respond to crises and risks, we have to have a more sophisticated system to manage the experts. So, in fact, the Trump administration, they separately designed the high expert management system, and it was announced by the OPM. So in the post-COVID world, yes, things could go, things can be stable, but a lot of people are now claiming that we really have to have a quick responses. That's why a very high level of expertise is required. And for these, the experts have to research diverse topics, and also there should be some leeways and autonomies being guaranteed for researchers. But the current HR system is very rigid under the unitary consolidated system. And as a result, the scientists and researchers, they have no opportunities to unleash their passion for their researches. And also that their passions are not properly rewarded. And therefore, for education and training, yes, we can boost the communication and the interactions. So maybe we can have a sort of a two-track HR system. So one track is for dealing with risk. And also there are very lucrative positions like the and many of them are leaving to the private sectors after years of public organization. So we have to find some solutions for this brain drain. So I think that this is a very, very important topic that may require the whole day discussion. But due to time limit, we may have to finish here. So I'd like to thank the two presenters. So in the second half of this year, yes, we are going to recruit the public officers, but recruitment is important, but at the same time, training is also very important. Before concluding this session, I would like to give you what Einstein said. He said that the life is like riding a bicycle. So in order to strike the balance, you have to keep going forward. Of course, you have to take some actions whenever necessary, but in order to embrace the future, you have to keep moving forward and addressing the challenges. So with that, thank you very much. We would like to conclude here.
너무나 훌륭한 말씀 해주신 세 분께 다시 한번 박수 부탁드립니다.
Please give another round of applause to
Thank you very
the
much for this
three
constructive presentations and
gentlemen.
discussion. We will now break for 5 minutes, and the next session will start in 5 minutes at 11:20. Thank you. 안녕하세요. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We will now begin the second session under the theme of Building Future Capacity of Public HR. Let me kindly remind you that each presentation, we have a time limit of 15 minutes and around 17 minutes for discussion session. Please allow me to invite the moderator for session 2, Mr. Woo Chun-sik, the Director of Office of Global Economy at KDI School. Please greet Dr. Woo with a round of applause.
Okay, thank you everybody. It's my great pleasure and this honor to be with you for this session. For this is very important issue of building the HR for the future, the capacity. Especially my great pleasure because I'm now with my old friend and colleague, Professor Jin Park from KDI School as the speaker, and then also another speaker from CITRA, a very globally renowned think tank, and also at the same time investment house of Latio Antilla as the second speaker. The importance of this issue, the future capacity, I guess this has been emphasized enough, stressed enough by President Park at the beginning, at the invitation letter. And now, as we are now living with the unprecedented faced with an unprecedented high uncertainty, and also where this our knowledge of scientific science and technology knowledge is all the more important. So this building was strengthening the future-related capacity for these public officials and the servant will be all the more important now than before. So this is the reason why we are at this session. Okay, and just our time is quite tight. So just as has been announced, that I'm very sorry that we just have 17 minutes for presentation for the two speakers, but let's try to keep up the time, and in order to have some minimum, our interaction, the discussion amongst us. So why don't we welcome the President Jim Park from the KDI School for his first presentation. Thank you. 17, yeah, right. Try to keep this. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. The topic for today is future-oriented competencies of the government. I'll try to find out what competency is necessary to better cope with the future from the civil servant's point of view, and try to draw some lesson for the further direction of training for civil servants and sake of the NHI, the host of this wonderful conference. I'm a professor at KDI School, and I served for the first founding president of the National Assembly Futures Institute until May this year. Well, there are 4 roles of public officers for the future. First of all, they have to foresee the different kinds of the future, starting from most probable future to most desirable future. There are many different kinds of future that you can get to. And the second, you have to select the most desirable future. That involves your value system. You have to choose the best one, okay, and that people like. And the third, you have to move from the most probable future to most desirable future by changing the strategies. And finally, you have to respond to the ever-changing current situation, including the emergency of the wild card. You have to quickly respond to those changing environment. And how can we make the public officers better carry out those different roles? Well, let me go through one by one, starting from foresight for the future. Okay. Well, first, you need to see the future. The most scientific way, one of the scientific ways is extrapolation for the future. So you need to have some technical ability to foresee the future based on the past. The second, in order to see the further, in order to see the longer horizon future, you need to have other methods of understanding the future. And in that case, you need more qualitative rather than quantitative method to see the future. And of course, you need to discern the emerging issues, and of course, and also wild card, which means unexpected event, which is not very plausible, but possible event. And how can we make civil servants better foresee the future? Well, they need to have creativity and openness to the new things and critical thinking. Especially critical thinking, it will be necessary to identify the emerging issues among many news and variables they witness every day. The second is the selection of the future. You have to find the preferred future by your own people. But a simple survey may provide you unreliable data. So in order to enhance the reliability, you need to select kind of information collection method like deliberative polling. And in fact, my Institute of National Assembly Futures has done similar work last year. And also, there is a representation issue. because the future will be enjoyed better by the younger generation, whose opinions are not well reflected in the policy making. Therefore, focusing on this opinion of younger generation and their need is very important. So after finding this, the future, preferred future, you need to build a consensus among people. And I think this is very much deficient competency for the Korean government. For instance, do we know the level of optimal tax burden? Do we have any consensus for that? Do we have a consensus for nuclear power plants? Do we have a consensus for foreign worker policy? Do we have a consensus for retirement age? We don't have any consensus for these. So this is something that we really have to focus on for the preparation of the future. And then how can we make public officers better select the future? Well, we need to find out what Korean people really wants. So civil servants need to have an ability relating to others, an opinion and their feeling. And they have to adapt to the changes because the preference of younger generation is quickly changing. And you have to understand and also you have to adapt to those changes. And of course, consensus building is very important competency for the selection of the future. And third, strategies to change the future. To select the most important strategy, you need to focus on selective and irreversible strategy. Selective strategy means if you have to select one option, you have to give up the other, as opposed to additive strategy, in which case you can have both. And of course, irreversible strategy is something that you cannot, reverse. So one example of those selective and irreversible strategy is closing down nuclear plants. Okay, then it's not reversible. Okay, these kind of strategies deserve most priority. And in terms of sequence of strategy, you have to select strategy that triggers other changes, and also a strategy that requires long lead time. Education is a typical example. It takes a long time to change the mindset and habits of people. Therefore, those education should start early in order to better cope with the future. Okay? And then how can we make public officers better change the world? First of all, they need to have some cognitive skill, such as understanding strategies, and also they have to open to something new. Because when they have to change the policy, they feel uncomfortable about it, because changing this policy that they have adopted for a long time is not an easy job to do. And also they have to be creative to find a new option. And again, consensus building is important to finalize your strategy. Fourth one and final one is response to the future. Okay? This requires all the previous qualification. So you have to identify the current situation quickly, and you have to find the direction to go, and you have to select these strategies. All these three previously mentioned competencies should be exercised within a short period of time. So it requires all the previous qualifications. And I explained the necessary qualifications depending on the process of the future strategies. But in terms of this field, there are three major policy goals for Korea: the growth, social integration, and sustainability. I think these three are very important direction and policy goals that we have to achieve. And I listed some of the important tasks that we will have to carry out to better cope with the future. Then what is most needed competency for Korean civil servants? well, necessary competency is explained here as a summary. Ability to see the future and identify problems, and ability to set the future direction based on people's opinion, and finally, ability to make changes. And of course, motivation is important. You need to have a long horizon, and also you need to have a good performance management about your action. So this is what we have to deal with in human resource management. So the rules and regulations for human resource management, and also its practice is important, so that civil servants can stay longer in their office. You know, when they stay in their position for 14 months on average, you cannot expect any longer horizon from civil servants. And they need skills listed there, and the qualifications, about qualifications I already explained. Then, what are the common personnel traits underlying those qualifications here? Well, I have an experiment for that. I enjoy making negotiation simulation game, and this is one that I invented 15 years ago. It is about railway station, and the community people wants to have the station under the ground to minimize environmental harm, damage. But the government wants to have a above ground the station in order to save cost. So here is the table of preference and table of options and points for community leader for underground station. So community has formed some kind of committee to fight against the government to achieve underground station. Okay? And so this community leader has to negotiate with the government, Ministry of Construction and Transportation, and the city of Goyang. So this is the actual case that happened 15 years ago. And there are 4 agendas, and of course, depending on the options, the points are given to each option that they agreed upon. And the community leader, who is responsible for underground station, representing the community people, wants to have option 1 for location of the station under the ground. That option will give him 10 points. But he will find that in order to achieve his option 1, he has to give up other agenda. So he has to give up other options. So he has to agree upon option 3, which gives him 0 points each. So if you add all those 4 red options, it will give him points 10. However, so most of the time, this is what a community leader is looking for. They try to agree upon these red options, which gives him points 10. However, if a community leader is flexible, he may want to choose the blue options. Blue option, there are 4 blue options, and if you add them up, it will give him points 11. So 1 point higher than the red option. Well, I have a training session with this experiment more than 50 times. It has been 15 years old simulation game, so I've experimented this over and over again, targeting different group of people. I found that civil servants clearly prefer red options. If I tested for 10 groups, only 1 or 2 groups choose the blue option. And the private sector people have much higher ratio. More than half of the group choose blue options. Well, I did not have a scientific experiment, so this is all just based on my simple observation. But I found that civil servants in Korea are not so flexible about this type of simulation game. They try to stick to these rules and cause. It's very much understandable. Civil servants are trained to respect rules, cause, and quick decision, so they are generally rigid thinker. or stock thinker, or rock thinkers? Yes, I think a necessary HRD for the future is flexibility. This is really what is lacking in Korea's civil servants. A flexible thinking makes you see things in a new way, look at a challenge with a new lens, feel okay when things change, and balance diverse views and beliefs to reach workable solution. And of course, they make people learn more quickly. What this this result of flexible thinking exactly matched with the qualifications necessary for the future. And I'm not an expert on the education, education theory, but I tried to learn from previous the books. In that respect, I really thank this organizer who gave me a chance to look at this literature on the education. And I found that flexibility is a really necessary qualification for civil servants. However, flexibility has not been emphasized in Korea's civil servants education. Of course, non-cognitive skill is very hard to train. So I found that NHI mostly focused on cognitive skill. But what is really necessary competency for the future? I think it should be non-cognitive skill, and especially flexibility should be given the priority for the future training and the contents for civil servants. Well, 5 brain exercise for flexible thinking is explained by this book, Agile Mind. And one of the tests for flexibility is this very short question. Find one word that is associated with all 3 in common. Green, pack, and lash. Well, of course, it is related with your vocabulary, but try to find one word that is associated with these 3 in common. Well, that will be back. Greenback, backpack, backlash. And well, I found that there are tests to see whether you are flexible enough, and this question was one of them. So I thought it would be interesting to introduce that to you. And finally, 7 ways to develop cognitive flexibility, and I hope you do read through. And they generally carry the same message. We should give civil servants a chance to think differently. Now we're doing that in our daily training program of NHI. And I think that NHI should make our public officials flexible thinkers so that they can be better cope with the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Park, for your very interesting presentation. And the flexibility is what is most lacking about its Korean government officials when they talk about the future-oriented competencies. Maybe most of these Korean government officials may think that I am flexible enough, just like the Gonde, the issue. And maybe, but that may not be the true. And we could talk a bit more about this during this discussion session. Thanks for keeping your presentation in time, precisely 17 minutes. Okay. Now so we'll go to our foreign speaker from Finland, Mr. Tapio Anttila from Sitra. As I said, he's the executive vice president of Sitra, and yes, he'll spare some minutes to introduce the Sitra. Okay, thank you. Is he ready? Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, South Korea. Even though the time of the day is quite dark in Helsinki, even though the Time of the year is quite dark in Helsinki, and even though the times in the world seem quite dark, I'm so delighted to be with you this morning. And I thank you really much for this opportunity to share my thoughts. And the best greetings to all my South Korean friends as well. I'm Tapio Anttila from the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. Thank you for the introduction and also the really interesting insights from Professor Park about the flexibility. I might have something to add on that. But first, I have heard so many metaphors about COVID-19 and how it will shape the world. And I think it's not 110 meters hurdles, it's not 5,000 or 10,000 meters run. Next, please. I thought it was a marathon, but not normal kind of a marathon, where you start and finish at the same place. My idea was that it was a marathon where we know the starting place, but we will not come back to the same place. But actually, we don't even know the distance or available time. So now I know it's not a marathon. The world after COVID-19 will be a different kind of place, and we will not return back to the old normal. Keeping this in mind, I have 3 points to make. First, the importance of forecasting the future. Second, the importance of environmental questions. And third, public sector leaders and digitalization. But first, few facts about Sitra. Next, please. We are independent and public think, do, and connect tank. So we are not only a think tank, we are more. We are 53 years old. We are under supervision of the Finnish Parliament, and we are funded by returns of endowment capital. And maybe the most important fact of all, we consider that the future is made together. Thank you. Next. And what do we do in Foresight? First, we publish megatrends. We encourage organizations to make visions. What is vision here? It's a positive long-term goal or even a dream. And then we study weak signals. Next. It's important to study megatrends and explore weak signals, but it's not enough. It's crucial that we study connections, tensions, and their contexts. For me, the future capacity is not only a special skill. I think it's more like a holistic approach to different kind of questions. And I have here a tip for you. Every now and then we publish our own thinking about weak signals and megatrends. And here is the link to the latest version of megatrends. And as you can see, we have also the card deck of the megatrends here. Next, please. There are no major surprises among the megatrends. That goes by definition. So why to study them then? First, it's important to establish a big picture of changes that are happening. We often focus only one megatrend at a time, but we should study them as a whole. Second, we need to pay attention to the tensions between changes. They are often factors that have the biggest impact on our future. Will the phenomenon continue to develop towards one side of the tension that exists within it? Will it have a new direction, or will the state of tension remain? Let's keep the big picture and the tension in mind as we dwell deeper into two megatrends of our time. My idea is to give some tasting samples of our megatrends. Next. But before touching these megatrends, I have challenge number one in mind. My experience is that often Even the most carefully made strategic plans fail. Why is that? Our environment today is not easy to predict. Interconnections, tensions, speed, surprises, and so on. That is why, for me, one key part of the future capacity is to understand that you have to monitor the changes, and then you must be willing to change your plans when the environment around it rapidly changes. I think this is a question of flexibility as well. So the strategic planning and forecasting are important, but the actual plan might be outdated very soon. Next. The question is, what can we do with megatrends and tensions? Megatrends provide us a useful foundation for scenario analysis, strategies, and envisioning. They can also be used more broadly as a tool for learning and understanding the world. But the question is, how should that be done? What should we take into consideration when using them? Next, please. I have here 5 tips for you using the megatrends. I will not go through them now, but if you have questions, I will come back to these. Next, please. Then my challenge number 2 is ecological questions. It's the center of our megatrends. It will have a huge impact on our world tomorrow. Next, please. Climate change is the best known megatrend in this respect. The climate is warming and extreme weather phenomena are increasing. However, the ecological sustainability crisis includes other changes that we need to consider. They include the loss of biodiversity, overconsumption of resources, widespread soil degradation, and an increase in the amount of waste. These are interconnected problems, so also the solutions are also linked to each other. Next, please. There are tensions. In addition to the changes outlined on the previous slides, we can also recognize specific tensions here. People are increasingly aware of the changes. Nevertheless, this growing awareness is not yet reflected to the corresponding increase in action. Consumption and emissions continue to grow. On the other hand, awareness has led to increased belittling of the change. On the other hand, it has led demands for bigger action. The key tension here concerns whether the transition to sustainable society is fair or unequal. Next, please. The question is, how successful will be in achieving quick and fair ecological reconstruction? What does it mean in practice for individual people? What do sustainable lifestyles look like? This is also a question of mindset. Do we see nature as a resource or as having intrinsic value? Next. Ecological reconstruction is not only a matter of technical solution or political decision. It's also about change in culture towards environmental and human sustainability. Next, please. Now, my challenge number 3. The key question is the role of technology and data, and who decides on them. Technology continues to develop rapidly, and it's coming embedded in society and daily life. Data is increasingly accumulated, and its value and significance are growing. While it presents new solutions in areas such as energy production and the more efficient use of resources, it has simultaneously led to a significant increase in the demand for energy and resources. Next. Technological development continues at a rapid rate, and new applications are quickly adapted. You could say that technology is quickly becoming embedded in our society and daily life. Next. Trends. Technological progress not only helps us to do things quicker and at a lower cost, it also changes the way we do things. There has been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and AI-driven applications becoming increasingly common. Renewable energy, and as technology becomes embedded in everything, the importance of understanding technology will be emphasized. Next. There are tensions. As the use of technology becomes increasingly widespread, the ethical and geopolitical issues around technology will grow in importance. Who controls the data that is essential for algorithms? Who owns the algorithms? Who owns the necessary infrastructure? As the use of technology becomes increasingly widespread, the ethical questions surrounding technology will be highlighted in a broader sense. To what extent will the development and application of technology increase inequality? To what extent does technology support ecological reconstruction, and to what extent does technology hinder it? In the form of increased energy consumption, for example. Next. In general sense, the question is who gets to exercise power over the future, or in other words, who gets to define the future scenarios? Who decides on the development of technology? Corporations, governments, or people, or all of them together? And we will be able to prevent the inequality that technology will potentially bring about. Next. In addition to understanding how our technology affects us, we should also think about how can we affect the development of technology. And my last very personal comment, when I think about the experiences of virtual meetings during this COVID-19 lockdown period, I'm very optimistic that Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, Skype, or whatever can be very useful to share information, make overviews, and things like that. I'm just now doing. But when you want to solve the problems or make deep learning processes, I must say we have a lot to learn. How to make virtual meetings meaningful. In difficult, demanding situations, face-to-face meetings and professional facilitation, consensus building on site are often necessary. Next. Here again is the big picture and a few of the key tensions. Ecological reconstruction is the heart of everything, but there are many changes taking place. I hope this big picture view helps us to understand our complex world and our potential future scenarios. Next. To find hope, it's important to discuss desirable future scenarios while giving due consideration to the megatrends. Perhaps the fundamental question for the new decade is, what kind of future do you want to build? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anttila, for your excellent presentation. It's very, very informative and insightful. We have, unfortunately, have only 10 minutes left assigned for this session. So the best way to make use of this time is we should just have allow some more time for the two speakers to elaborate on some point they want to make. We didn't have enough of time because just my question, if I'm allowed to give, and is this about the training issue, about the future as a capacity. We need knowledge, but for these government officials to have enough of this knowledge, enough to use, then it's got to be trained or kind of delivered somehow. And in Korea, this is the National HR Institute is the primary and the main kind of instrument or the pipeline for to give this type of training for the future related. I heard that this is increasing a little bit over the past years, which is good. And also, somehow, President Park, in the previous session, mentioned about this importance of the training on the science and technology as the kind of base to make, to have the capability to foresee the future or the better prepare the future. So, yes, as Professor Park, because as he has worked in the ministry, government quite a while ago as the Ministry of Planning and the Budget about 20 years ago or so, and also was the president of the NAFI, National Assembly Future, this institute. So I'd like to ask Professor Park, how do you rate and think about this Korea's institutional capability to deliver this type of training about the future capacity, the foresight or something? And at the same time, just the question I'd like to ask to Mr. Antilla, to the CITRA, because CITRA is, as mentioned by him, it's more than research institute. This is the training institute, while at the same time the investment institute. So focusing on the training, the function of the CITRA, so I'd like to ask, you will be happy if we can hear a little bit about this CITRA, the function as a training institute on this future capacity, like something that he described. So these are two questions for me. The one for to the Professor Park and one to the Mr. Antilla. And why don't we have the Professor Park? 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, in order to change the behavior of a person, you need to change his motivation and also his idea or his way of thinking. And the motivation is changed by his penalty or reward system and evaluation system. And Korean civil servants' motivation to prepare for the future is very much constrained by the short length of their tenure in the office. We have a 5-year one-term presidency, which makes our perspective relatively myopic. So that really influences all the civil servants. And so I think that we need to first to change their personnel management system so that they can stay in their position longer and properly evaluated by what they have done. So this change of personnel management system is the first key. And of course, the training is an important part of it. But I think that it is not only a problem for education for civil servants, but it's education as a whole in Korea. We have focused on educating cognitive skill all through different level of education, but we already know that the non-cognitive skills, such as critical thinking, collaboration, is more important for the future. But having this new type of curriculum takes a lot of time and money and efforts. And the trainer themselves, including myself as a professor, is having a hard time in making such transition. So it has to be motivated by the government so that the curriculum can be changed dramatically. And it's not an easy job, though, but it's a must for for the future. I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, education has a really long lead time. It takes a long time to change the mindset of people, so it has to start early. But education is probably the last area where we can facilitate such changes. Students and teachers alike are not very much open to the new idea. And so in that respect, I think NHI should be a trigger in that transition of education from cognitive skill to non-cognitive skill. And if you take a look at the curriculum of NHI, most of them are about cognitive skill. Very few topics or subjects for non-cognitive skill. And although it is very difficult job, again, it's really a must change that Korea needs to do to prepare for the future. So, I think we need resources for that and motivation scheme to facilitate that progress. And that initiative should come from the government, such as NHI. In that respect, I think this is a very good opportunity to start the change. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Mr. Antila?
Thank you for very interesting and excellent question. As I mentioned, Sitra is a think, do, and connect tank. So we have quite a long history in this connect part to train Finnish decision makers. Actually, I mentioned three what is going on. We have a sustainable economic policy leadership courses. We start this economic policy leadership courses already 77, so it's a long history. The point here is that we invite leaders from different sectors of the society. That means from political life, from government, non-government, opposition, from trade unions, from civil servants, big company leaders, and so to think together what kind of Finland they would like to build. Then we have Sitra Lab. It's a problem-solving, quite short time period when we take a specific problem and invite people to specialists. How can we solve that? And now we are actually building a program about future capacity building within specialists and decision makers in Finland. But what is common for all these our programs is that we try to do this think, do, and connect inside every program, and we create dialogue between different people. And this dialogue compared to consensus building, I could speak about this topic for hours, but the most important part is that in dialogue you try to understand other people, and when you are successful, you don't only speak together, you think together, and it's more like consensus building. You create something new. But these activities are, let's say, they are the key part of what we are doing in Finland, and also our other projects have this kind of aspects. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just I read that we don't have enough of the time to elaborate it fully. It's on the point as you raised. Just thanks to the excellent cooperation from the speakers, right on time to finish our session. Just to conclude this session, I came to learn myself from the Professor Park that it is more than just technical knowledge or just know-how. but it's more cognitive skills and the flexible way of reorganizing the future knowledge, and possibly in collaboration with your partners or the colleagues. Okay, somehow if the programs in Korea is programs are kind of biased for technical knowledge to enhancing the technical knowledge of the government officials, that I guess that we better listen to the Professor Park's suggestion that as these cognitive skills that is as important in the enhancing our future-related foresight, the future-related capabilities. Also, which the point kind of echoed by Mr. Antilla, by the CITRA, and also the collaboration and dialogue, and something is as important as kind of front-running research for which. And just I came to me to think that we need to have more intimate collaborations between this HR-related institutions. For instance, in Korea, and surely we have a National HR Institute, and also in NAFI, and also many research institutes among the organizations like KDI. But overall, we have CITRA. CITRA as maybe a good partner for us to discuss and to develop these ideas we discussed today. Okay, thanks for your attention and participation for this session. And once again, I would like to thank you the presenter this session, Professor Park and Mr. Antilla. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to these three gentlemen. Thank you. 감사합니다. We will now break for 7 minutes, and we will reconvene at 12:20 for our session 3. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. We will now begin the third and final session of today's important conference. This session was prepared to share the different endeavors made in the public HR sector. In session 3, we are joined by 2 speakers from HRD Division of Ministry of Personnel Management and NHI. Please allow me to introduce Mr. Oh Young-Ryul, Director of the HRD Division at MPM, and Mr. Jo Hoon-hyun, Professor at NHI. Let me invite Mr. Oh to give us his presentation on building HRD platform for the public HRD innovation in the new normal era. Please, I kindly ask you to stay in the time limit until 12:40. Thank you.
안녕하십니까. 방금 소개받은 인사혁신처 인재개발과장입니다. 먼저 오늘 컨퍼런스에서 인사혁신처에서 추진 중인 사업에 대해서 소개할 수 있게 되어서 매우 기쁘게 생각하고 감사하다는 말씀을 드립니다. 이번 세 번째 세션의 첫 번째 주제로 인사혁신처에서 추진 중인 국가지능형 인재개발 오픈 플랫폼 사업을 소개해드리고자 합니다. 이 사업은 금년도에 시작되었으며 총 3개년에 걸쳐서 추진될 예정입니다. 먼저 이 사업의 추진 배경에 대해서 간략히 말씀드리겠습니다. 급변하는 정책 환경과
rapidly changing policy environment and advances in digital technology,
전면적인 변화가 필요한 시점입니다.
now we face with the citizens' expectations for the public officials' competency, creating the need for transforming public HRD's content and approach. As you see, we are witnessing rapid changes in social technological environment. In addition to that, there is a growing need for non-face-to-face education. In addition to that, interdisciplinary creativity and knowledge is required on the part of the policy of the government. In line with this, HRD in the public sector needs to be changed. There is such a growing need. We need to grow content in quality and diversity. In addition to that, we need to create an online learning environment, and we should strengthen the link between job duties and learning. According to one of the reports of the OECD, securing the competency for the future in the age of uncertainties requires a system to develop competency in time, in digital space, with the members of the society. This platform project, or this project to build a platform, is being implemented in line with the overall government direction, government policy direction. Now, I'd like to give you an overview of this platform. There are 3 key features of this platform. First, it is a learning hub where a wide range of learning content from the government and the private sector is freely distributed. Second, it serves the purpose of being a customized learning analysis and recommendation system. I think in public HRD, this is the first ever project with AI and big data technologies integrated. And third, it will serve as a non-face-to-face online learning system with live video learning system specifically designed for public officials. At the bottom of this slide, you can see how it will be organized and composed. The key rationale behind this is integration, openness, and sharing. Here, in order to create the foundation for customized recommendation of courses, but job information of public officials will be integrated, and HR information will be integrated as well. And we will link and integrate various content from government and public institutions. Live videos and various the video content is also included in this category. And we will have a free access granted even to the private sector. And third, public officials, if there is anything they find useful, or if there is any content they create, can share with their colleagues. Now I'd like to turn to what kind of changes will be brought about by this platform.
이 플랫폼을 설계하는 과정에서의 어떤 기술적인 측면보다는
Rather than
사용자 공무원
focusing
입장에서
on
현재와
the technical
비교해서
aspect
어떠한
of this
변화가
platform,
일어나는지를
from the perspective
그리고 저희
of a
사업에서
public
어떠한
official,
변화를
I'd like
기대하고
to share
있는지를
with you what kind of
초점을 두고
expectations we have
설명을
and what kind of
드리겠습니다.
benefits we expect and envision for this project.
첫 번째로
First,
이 플랫폼을 통해서
through
보다
this platform,
풍부하고
we want to offer
다채로운
easier access to
콘텐츠를 더
rich and
편리하게
diverse
제공할 수 있게
content.
됩니다. 사실 현재도 한국 정부에서는
Currently,
공무원 교육에 필요한
the Korean
온라인
government
학습 콘텐츠를 다수 보유하고 있습니다. 그리고 많은
has
공무원들이 이러한
offered the
콘텐츠를 잘
various
이용하고 있습니다.
online learning content
그러나
to the greatest use by public officials. However, the initiative lies with the government. That is why there have been some limitations in the use of excellent learning content from the private sector and from the outside of the public sector. And it is rather complex and time-consuming to use and to create new content. And from the perspective of private entities, there is such a high entry barrier to move into the education market for public officials. But once we have this platform, we will be able to offer massive learning content over 500,000 sessions from both public and private sectors. And any content providers in the private sector can join the platform without complex procedure or entry barrier to provide content directly to consumers. However, there is one caveat. There might be some attempt to distribute harmful content. That is why we want to block those content swiftly and precisely through AI verification and operator authentication. But through this, we will be able to grant a better and easier access to more quality learning content for public officials and new growth opportunities for the private content market. At the bottom, you can see how demand and supply will be linked via platform directly.
두 번째로
And second,
빅데이터 분석이나 인공지능 추천을 통해서 개인별
we will be able to realize truly personalized learning through big data analysis and AI recommendation.
기관별 사이트에 일일이 접속해야
Up to this point, separate log-on is required to each website to find courses, and it is quite difficult to manage learning record.
원하는 콘텐츠를 찾는 것이 좀
Furthermore, it has been rather difficult to find courses I need or the content I want. But once this platform is built and completed, then search and learning in one place of various learning content in and outside the government would be available. And learning data is automatically built and managed with this platform. In addition to that, personalization and personalized recommendation will be made possible. So based on the job duty information, recommendation can be made, or the learning records would be utilized for this personalized recommendation. Or the platform can refer to similar groups or cohorts through big data and AI analysis to make a recommendation for various courses. The online shopping mall would use such an algorithm, and that algorithm will be introduced into this platform building. And third, and it will be realized the job duty-oriented learning, which links work and learning smoothly. Public officials are tied up with work, so there is no time for them to attend group training sessions. In addition to that, the learning is not linked to the work they do, so public officials are busy filling mandatory hours. There is a clear segregation to a certain extent between the work they do and the learning or the courses they would take. Once this platform is implemented, then the public officials will be able to search and learn on the spot vast work-related learning resources in various formats when needed. And anyone can easily and quickly share and communicate new knowledge and know-how with their colleagues. I think this would be the most practical and pragmatic approach for public officials.
네 번째로
And fourth,
실시간 온라인 학습 환경이 구축됩니다.
a live online learning environment will be created to be braced for the post-COVID-19 era. I think this is quite
세계
essential.
많은 나라가 비슷한 상황이었겠습니다.
I think most of the countries around the world are under quite a similar situation, and with this COVID-19, it has become quite difficult for the Korean government to conduct any group training sessions for public officials. A lot of sessions have been cancelled or postponed.
민간의 화상 교육 프로그램들을 활용해서 온라인
Well,
방식으로
some of the programs and the sessions have been done via online by using an online platform. However, but such an approach could be quite expensive. At the same time, it could pose security concerns.
교육에 좀 최적화된
So, with this platform, we want to
정부에서는 절감하게 되었습니다.
build an optimal platform for live online learning for public officials.
앞서 말씀드렸던 그러한 이슈들도 해결을 하고 강사와
We will be able to tackle the issues I have elaborated on previously, and we will be able to ensure an interactive learning and teaching between the lecturer and public officials.
같은 위기 상황에서 대면 교육을 대체한다는 개념도 있겠지만
To a certain degree, this will be able to replace the on-site in-person training, but all at the same time, this might be able to complement offline training and education session. So, blended education approach enhances the learning result, according to many researchers.
마지막으로
Last but not least, this platform will enable support database scientific HRD policy formulation. So far, various learning data has been managed manually by HRD staff. Accordingly, there have been some limitations in in-depth data analysis of learning demand and effect. With this platform, all learning-related data will be accumulated and managed automatically. And then based on this data set accumulated and built, will ensure sophisticated and effective HRD policy formation. So content data and content information, learning activity data will be accumulated so that we can analyze learning effect and satisfaction as well. So the department head and the user as well as the HRD department will be able to utilize the data.
제가 준비된 내용은 말씀을 다 드렸습니다. 이게 발표를 마치기에 앞서
Before
몇 가지만 좀
concluding my presentation, there are several points I'd like to share with you. As we plan and implement this project, the key overarching goal is user-centeredness. The easy to use and helpful system creation is the ultimate goal of this project. So as we build this platform, we would do some pilot run and then expand this further. So through this, we will get a feedback from users. Governments around the world are in different situations, but with this outbreak of COVID-19, everyone came to realize the importance or the need to innovate public HRD or public HR so that we can enhance the competitiveness of public HR. I hope today's conference will serve as a great opportunity to promote a further discussion on this matter. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Mr. Oh, a warm round of applause. I believe Mr. Oh's presentation gave us the opportunity to have an overview on the HRD direction and user-oriented policies of MPM. Next up, I would like to invite Professor Cho Hoon-hyun at NHI, who will present a case study on strategic training program for strengthening future-oriented public leadership. Please give him a big hand.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm pretty excited and honored to have a chance to present the insight with you. Especially sitting in front of me is like 20,000 people around the world. So, and we'll be there, so don't worry about it. Okay, I believe in Mr. Tapio's presentation before, his presentation actually reminded one really important phrase, which is he mentioned that the technology actually affects us pretty much. But the fact is, how do we actually affect technology? I mean, that's a big question. Because in the field of the human resource development, we sometimes confronted with lots of, difficult challenges. Nowadays, especially in the era of COVID, the technology suddenly take the front seat. So everybody's talking about the online education, well, methodologies, flipped learning, and all those things. My question is, okay, that's okay. But all of those jargons and technology makes who happy? So my presentation is centering around that topic today. So let's move on. We have many wishes. As you see in the cartoons in front of you, is that you spend a lot of money, $3,000 on computer and $1,200 in laser printer and a couple of $100 in word processing program. And he still got D. I think it's not fair. Well, I think it's not only his case. When we look at the screen, we are spending lots of time discussing about the total learning, bite-sized learning, agile, PBL, EDDI, rapid ISD, GBS, case-based reasoning, situated learning, informal learning, constructivism, makes me tired, and our public enemy, flipped learning. Well, my question is this. Every time we visit the AS3D or global conferences centering around HLD subject, people are kept on repackaging the same concept. My question is, well, okay, that is okay. But who are happy now? So let's think about that first. I would like to introduce the changes in the strategic HLD field in terms of positions. I mean, highest position. Who's in charge of the human resource development from the past, from the future to the future? At first, that's around from 80s or 90s. The highest position that HLD, the person in HLD, can go up to is a training director. He's mainly in charge of tactics and safe operation of the education itself. But time changes. The highest position, moving to the CLO, that's Chief Learning Officers. That's mainly about, controlling everything from the planning, strategy, and executing. But the thing we luck in here, he didn't put too much effort in following up the effect of HLD activities. So people are considering, okay, we need to move on. So the position is move up to higher. Now we have a Chief Knowledge Officer in most of the institution. Well, not in Korean government. But his planning was, his main role is, he's in charge of entire operation from the strategy, from the follow-up to the follow-up. That means the HLD now it's not centering around learn and perform. It's a basic thing. Everybody does that these days. But how do we succeed it? How do we actually prove our HLD's activities effective and efficiently performed? My question is always centering out here. Let's see this small pie chart. It's a comparison between the strategic HLD and just the safe educational management. Let's see the first picture. They pour 85% of their effort in just doing the training sessions safe and sound. Their main goal is get the satisfaction rate higher. But let's move on to the next pie chart. It says they only spend they only spend 24% of their resources in performing the work, learning itself. But the biggest part of their resource burning is centering around follow-up, because they are mainly interested in what has been changed by all of those HLD efforts. It's a common sense. When you spend money, you need to get ROI properly. Well, that's my question. But where are we? So let's look into this. It's from the Samsung Multi-Campus. They asked biggest company, like top 20 companies in Korea, are you doing the HLD in strategical manner? Well, their answer is yes, 47%. 47%, I want it, but it's not easy. And 11% is still, what is the strategy HLD is? So when you sum it up, almost like 53% of institution does not reach to the proper strategic HLD relevant. So I thought that was a big challenge, but why? Human resource development has been the biggest subject for a long time. Then why we cannot reach to the strategic status yet? So I'll look into this. It's somewhat complicated, but well, we'll solve it. Entire HLD, the root of HLD must stand on solid organization's value system. Mission, core values, vision. And based on that, we set up great human resource, declaration or something. We want this kind of people in our institution. Look fancy. But let's look into this more closely. Why strategic HLD is difficult? Because of this complicated context. First, we need to have a clear job group duty and strategic placement. It's not easy because we don't know which person is good at which person is good at which, because most of the organizations doesn't care about that. They only care about the resumes. But let's move on. When a new person came in, we should do some diagnosis on him. So we should have competence assessment process. System. And after that, that person should be allowed to plan mid to long-term career development. That's a common sense. After that, we need to support and help him to maintain that human resource development activities. And then, after that, we need to have a solid analysis on his performance. And after that, we should bring that result to where? Again, competence assessment. It's an iteration cycle of HLD. But when you have this process in your head, it's not working because you need a system and model. To do the job group and duty and strategic placement, you need to have a job structure ready, and it should be systemized. And you should have competence library ready, and it should be pretty solid. After that, to make the career planning, you need to keep the consistency in his career pursuit. And after that, we need to have a CBC, that means competence-based curriculum, which can help that people develop his ability according to the institution guide. And after that, we need to have a LMS to maintain all of those complex things together. And after that, this is really a critical thing. Like a couple of the presenters mentioned this morning, they need to keep a competency and performance management system. We need to compare, we need to have a system that could compare competency level and skill level together. Well, I don't know why it's not that easy, but only a few institutions keep that system in their schema. Also, we need to maintain this complex data, make this system work. And then we need to keep the policies healthy to help HLD, employees, management, and HRM together. Well, piece of cake, right? I know it's complex and it's complicated. I'm really surprised that only a few institutions have this picture in the planner's mind, especially in the level of management. I think it's a critical problem. So let's move on. I actually designed this leather model a couple of years ago. When I started work on NHI, I thought we need to have some kind of solid strategic model or system that can effectively deliver a good quality training program to the trainees, which are our customers. So I basically designed this 6-step: listen, analyze, develop, deliver, execute, and revise. It is consisted of data mining. We need to listen what they want. We need to interview the higher level. We need to interview the working level. We need to interview the customer level all together. We need to combine the result by analyzing. By squeezing the data, we can set up a really good and legit purpose of the program. And then we need to have a great development step and system in the institution. That's the hard part. Because professionalism and expertism is always an assignment for us, because we don't have a system to keep the good people inside the institution. Let's move on. Deliver. We need to maintain legit and really efficient delivery channel, including, well, good professors. And then, after the training, the employees go back to their work. Probably they try to, well, use the knowledge they learned from the training. But it's very hard job for them to do that. It's institution's responsibility to help them to deploy the knowledge they learn throughout the education. We need to keep that system working. And then, revise. I think it's the most critical part, because at this stage, we actually analyze the complete result of the training cycle and analyze the lesson learned. Why? Because we're going to use it for the next time. You need to keep that iterated all the time. Make it better, better, and better. Okay, let's move on. By looking at this, it's not that hard to implement. But leather system, leather model, is divided into 3 parts. Listen, analyze, and develop is activities concerning about the pre-training. And deliver is directly connected to the training. And 2 parts, execution and revision, is only connected to the post-training. When I put the Kirkpatrick's first stage evaluation model, we can divide the sector like that. But some people ask me, what's the difference between the Eddy and leather? Well, this leather model puts strong emphasis on the post-training activities, execution and revision. So hopefully, this could help lots of HLD practitioners. So, let me go through this and quickly and finish the presentation, because we don't have that much time. At the listening stage, we need to collect every possible data outside. Voice from the labor leader, voice from the work, voice from the customer. That's one of the most critical data we can collect outside. And the next thing, instructional designer's point of view. We need an expertise person inside the institution who can see the larger picture of the training. And then we need to listen to subject matters experts outside. And then we need to collect evaluation data. From where? From the training we've been done before. But, well, I don't know why is it so difficult. We don't use accumulated revision data when we create the new course. Somehow, it's dumped somewhere, and nobody cares about it. I think that's a really big obstacles we should overcome really fast. Okay, next thing, analyze. In the analyze stage, we analyze all the data that is collected, listen stage, and move on to develop, deliver, execution, and revision. But to make the revision work, we need to have that solid HLD cycle, strategical HLD system inside our institution. Well, it's not an easy thing. So, it will eventually, all of this complex thing, eventually has the leader, not the technology, not the higher level people happy. Only concern we need to concentrate on is our customer, learner. But is that all? No, I don't think so. We have one more customer, that's public. If we could succeed in making the learner more smarter, more able, that result, the final beneficiary should be our loving public outside. And it should be our main concern all the time. So, fortunately, the human resource development in Daegu metropolitan city actually adopted this model and created one course, prototype course. And they said, hey, Professor Cho, we've been receiving President's Award using your model. When I heard that call, I was pleased. But when I see their effort actually implement these 6 models, stage model, I was really impressed. So I would like to have a chance to introduce them. They would like to create the public design course, public city design course. And not like before, adapting a leather model, they put lots of resource in collecting data from the outside. They participated in lots of different conferences, invited SMEs, professors, and collect them. And they systematically analyze them. And then they design the proper classes. Not much difference, right? When they deliver it, well, it's the same thing. But the difference comes here. In the execution and revision phase, they put lots of resources. They said they put like 60% of their development cost into this stage. Because, like I mentioned before, they want to make it better next time. And they want to make it better 2 next time later. They want to make it better n times later. It's an iteration in HLD field. So, lessons. I think it's pretty necessary to focus more on the change from the learning in terms of cost to performance, which is the subject of organizational performance improvement. It's a common sense. The next thing, as interest in measuring education effects increases, it is necessary to establish a detailed evaluation system. I'd like to add one point. It is very critical. Make that system clean. It's the most invaluable data in your institution. Let nobody touches it. It's like a vault of, all the treasures inside your institution. Make it holy. And then, more attention needs to be paid to the transfer of knowledge, not the execution and just implementation of the training program. And next. Well, it's not an easy thing. Each agency needs to design its own systematic process that reflects the agency's goal and characteristics, like leather I created here. I don't know if it is most suitable model for NHI, but we'll see. It is also necessary to continuously think about the improvement point and educational effectiveness based on the needs on the field. Well, It's a natural thing. The policy and systematic support that will strengthen the sense of responsibility and the mission as a partner of organization and customer are also very important. Well, that's it for my presentation. So thanks for listening and your concentration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cho. Thank you for sharing your valuable analysis and your insights on this interesting case study of strategic training program. Now, this brings us to the end of all the sessions lined up for the 2020 Global Public HR Conference. Before we close, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to all the speakers, moderators, and participants from around the globe for your undivided attention for the last 4 hours. I believe today's conference, which was specially presented to you in a no-contact fashion, was decorated with in-depth insights and wisdoms, which I hope you find it instrumental in your future endeavors. With this, we will officially close the 2020 Global Public HR Conference, Public HR, Embrace the Future. Once again, thank you very much for your attention and participation. We wish you all the best and health until we meet again next time in person. Thank you. 네, 감사합니다. 오늘 회의를 마치고요. 회의장을 방문해 주신 여러 관계자 여러분 그리고 연사 여러분들께 오찬이 준비되어 있습니다. 지하 1층 한일관에 가시면 되겠고요. 직원들의 안내에 따라서 엘리베이터를 이용해 주셔서 지하 1층으로 가주시면 되겠습니다. 코로나19 방역 지침에 따라서 식당 입구에서 QR코드 체크인을 한다는 점 말씀드립니다. 감사합니다. 안녕히 가십시오.